The thunder of hooves echoed through the valley as Abram Fletcher rode hard toward his homestead, dread coiling in his gut like a rattlesnake. The telegram had been brief but devastating. Troublemakers looking for you, asking questions about the land, claim they have papers. He'd left his children 7-year-old Sarah and 5-year-old Matthew alone with only the promise he'd return before nightfall. Now, as the setting sun painted the Wyoming Territory sky crimson in the summer of 1876, Abram feared what might await him. The modest cabin came into view, nestled against the backdrop of pine trees and rolling hills that had become home over the past 3 years since his wife's passing. No smoke rose from the chimney, no children played in the yard, the stillness sent ice through his veins. Sarah, Matthew. Abram called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. His spurs jangled as he rushed toward the cabin, drawing his Colt revolver from its holster. The door hung ajar. Inside, chairs were overturned, and the small table where they took their meals was pushed against the wall. His heart hammered in his chest. "Papa," a small voice emerged from beneath the floorboards, and Abram nearly collapsed with relief. He holstered his gun and dropped to his knees, pulling up the loose board that concealed the small storage space beneath the cabin, a hiding place he'd shown the children for emergencies. Sarah's tear-stained face appeared first, her blonde braids disheveled. Matthew clung to his sister, eyes wide with fear. "You're safe now," Abram whispered, gathering them into his arms. "What happened?" "Men came," Sarah explained, her voice trembling. "They had papers and said this wasn't our land. They said they'd be back tomorrow with the sheriff." Abram's jaw tightened. He'd purchased this land legally 3 years ago from Old Man Wilson before the elderly rancher headed back east. He had the deed locked away in the bank in Willow Creek, 15 miles to the south. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, examining the children for injuries. Matthew shook his head. "We hid like you taught us when we heard horses. They never knew we were here." Pride mingled with fear in Abram's heart. His children had been brave, but their safety was now in jeopardy. The Blackwater Mining Company had been pushing smaller landowners out across the territory, using forged deeds and corrupt officials. Abram had heard whispers in town, but never imagined they'd come for his modest spread. "We need to leave tonight," he decided, rising to his feet. "Pack only what you can carry. We'll head to town and sort this out with the proper authorities." As the children gathered their meager belongings, Abram retrieved the small box containing family keepsakes, his wife's wedding ring, letters, and the photograph taken shortly before illness had claimed her. The faces of his small family stared back at him, his own bearded visage standing tall behind his seated wife, her hands resting on the shoulders of a younger Sarah and Matthew on her lap. They rode through the night, Abram with Matthew secured before him on the saddle, Sarah riding behind with her arms wrapped tightly around her father's waist. The moon lit their path toward Willow Creek, but Abram avoided the main road, taking lesser-known trails through the scrubland. Dawn was breaking when they reached the outskirts of town. Abram slowed their pace, eyes scanning for unfamiliar faces. Willow Creek wasn't large, a main street with the essential businesses, a church, the bank, and scattered homes, but it was the center of commerce for ranchers and homesteaders for miles around. "We need to speak with Judge Harmon," Abram told the children as they dismounted in front of the small hotel. "But first, let's get some food and rest." The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Jenkins, a stout woman with kind eyes, greeted them with concern. "Abram Fletcher, you look like you've ridden through hell itself, and these poor dears are exhausted." "We've had some trouble, Mrs. Jenkins. Need a room for a few days while I sort it out." She nodded, not asking questions. "Room at the back, more peaceful for the little ones." After settling the children with a hot meal and ensuring they fell into an exhausted sleep, Abram made his way to the bank, where the deed to his property was stored. The bank manager, Mr. Thompson, retrieved the document from the safe, and Abram confirmed it was legitimate. "This is a proper deed, Abram," Thompson assured him. "Signed and witnessed correctly, but I've heard troubling rumors about Blackwater using forged documents to challenge legitimate claims. Judge Harmon is out of town until next week." Abram's heart sank. A week was too long to wait with men threatening to return to his land. Is there anyone else who can help? Thompson hesitated. You might speak with the widow Taylor. She's been handling some legal matters since her husband passed last year. He was a lawyer from back east, and she assisted with his practice. A widow handling legal matters. Abram raised an eyebrow. Uncommon, I know, but she has knowledge most in these parts don't. Her husband taught her well. She lives in the White House at the end of Spruce Street. After checking on his sleeping children, Abram made his way to the indicated house. It was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden out front where late summer flowers bloomed despite the harsh Wyoming climate. He knocked on the door, hat in hand. The woman who answered wasn't what he expected. He'd imagined someone older, weathered by grief and frontier hardship. Instead, Hope Taylor appeared to be in her mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, though wisps had escaped to frame a face that showed both intelligence and wariness. Her green eyes assessed him critically. Mrs. Taylor, I'm Abram Fletcher. Mr. Thompson at the bank suggested I speak with you about a legal matter, Mr. Fletcher. She nodded, neither friendly nor unwelcoming. What sort of legal matter? Land dispute. Men claiming to have papers that supersede my deed. I believe they're working for Blackwater. At the mention of Blackwater, something flashed in her eyes, recognition and perhaps anger. You'd better come in, she said, stepping aside. The interior of her home revealed a woman of education and refinement adapting to frontier life. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. A desk occupied the corner, covered with papers and legal documents. My husband represented several homesteaders against Blackwater before his death, she explained, gesturing for Abram to sit. They've become increasingly aggressive in their tactics. They threatened my land while I was in town yesterday. My children were alone and had to hide. His voice caught as he relived the fear. I need to prove my claim is legitimate before they return. Hope studied him for a moment before moving to her desk. Show me your deed. For the next hour, they examined the document together. Hope explained legal terms and pointed out elements that strengthened his claim. Her knowledge impressed him, as did her determination. Your deed is sound, she finally said. But Blackwater has been filing falsified prior claims and bribing officials to backdate them. They're particularly interested in land along Cedar Creek. Abram's property bordered the creek. For the water rights, Hope shook her head. Gold. There have been small findings upstream. They believe the entire creek bed may contain deposits. The revelation struck Abram like a physical blow. His land, chosen for its good soil and reliable water, might hold wealth he'd never imagined. What can I do? Judge Harmon won't be back for a week, and these men promised to return today with the sheriff. Sheriff Miller is an honest man, but he can be intimidated, Hope said thoughtfully. You need to file a counterclaim and formal complaint, but more importantly, you need to be on your land when they return. I can't take my children back there. It's not safe. Hope hesitated, then made a decision. They can stay here with me while you return to meet these men. I'll draft the necessary legal papers tonight. Abram studied her face, uncertain. Why would you help us? You don't know me. I know Blackwater, she replied, her voice hardening. They use their power and money to steal from honest people. My husband fought them, and after he died, she stopped abruptly. After he died, Abram prompted gently. Hope met his gaze steadily. His death was ruled an accident, a riding mishap. I've never believed it. The implication hung in the air between them. Abram felt a chill despite the warm summer day. I can't ask you to endanger yourself by helping us. You didn't ask, Mr. Fletcher. I offered. Her tone brooked no argument. I'll need to meet your children. They'll be frightened of another stranger. When they returned to the hotel, Sarah and Matthew were awake and wary. They shrank back as Hope entered their room, pressing themselves against the headboard of the bed they shared. Children, Abram said gently, this is Mrs. Taylor. She's going to help us with our problem. Hope knelt to their level, keeping a respectful distance. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Matthew. Your father tells me you were very brave yesterday. The children remained silent, eyeing her suspiciously. I understand why you're afraid, Hope continued. Strangers came to your home and scared you. But I promise I'm here to help. Matthew whispered something to Sarah, who then addressed Hope. How do we know we can trust you? Hope considered the question seriously. That's very wise, Sarah. You shouldn't trust strangers easily. She thought for a moment, then said, Your father needs to go back to your home to protect it. I'm offering to let you stay with me while he's gone, but I understand if that frightens you. Sarah and Matthew exchanged glances. We want to stay with Papa, Matthew declared. It's too dangerous, Abram explained. These men might return with weapons. Fear flashed in the children's eyes. Sarah, attempting to be brave for her younger brother, asked Hope, How long would we have to stay with you? Just until your father resolves this matter. A few days at most. We don't know you, Sarah insisted. Hope nodded thoughtfully, then said something that would change the course of all their lives. You're right, you don't know me now, but you'll know my face by morning, I promise. That night, Hope stayed at the hotel, sleeping in a chair while the children and Abram occupied the beds. True to her word, by morning, the children had grown accustomed to her presence. She had shared stories of her own childhood in Boston, listened to their fears, and shown them a small wooden puzzle box that had been her father's. By breakfast, Matthew was sitting in her lap, demonstrating how he could count to 20. I need to ride back to the homestead, Abram told the children as they finished their meal. Mrs. Taylor will take care of you until I return. Fear immediately returned to their faces. What if the bad men hurt you, Papa? Sarah asked. I'll be careful, he promised. And I'll come back for you as soon as I can. Hope walked with Abram to the livery stable, carrying a leather satchel. I've prepared the legal documents. Present them to whoever comes with these men. If Sheriff Miller is with them, remind him of his oath to uphold the law, not just follow orders from wealthy interests. Abram took the papers, acutely aware of how close she stood. In the morning light, he noticed flecks of gold in her green eyes. Thank you for everything. For the legal help and for caring for my children. They're wonderful children, she said softly. You've raised them well, especially without their mother. It hasn't been easy, he admitted. Emily's been gone 3 years now. Some days I still turn to tell her something before remembering she's not there. Hope's expression softened with understanding. The absence becomes a presence of its own, doesn't it? Yes, exactly that. For a moment, they stood in shared recognition of loss. Be careful, Mr. Fletcher, Hope finally said, stepping back. These men won't give up easily. Abram, he corrected. After all this, I think you should call me Abram. A small smile touched her lips. Be careful, Abram. He rode hard, reaching his homestead by midday. Nothing appeared disturbed since their hasty departure. He unsaddled his horse, brought water from the well, and then set about making the cabin look occupied, lighting the stove, setting out personal items, and cleaning up the disarray from the intruder's previous visit. Mid-afternoon brought the sound of approaching riders. Abram stepped onto the porch, Hope's legal papers in hand, his revolver within easy reach but not drawn. 4 men approached, 3 he didn't recognize, and to his dismay, Sheriff Miller. Mr. Fletcher, the sheriff acknowledged, looking uncomfortable. These gentlemen claim to have ownership papers for this property. One of the men, wearing an expensive suit despite the dusty ride, dismounted and approached. I'm Harold Whitmore, representing Blackwater Mining Company. We have documentation showing this land was purchased by our company before your alleged acquisition. My deed is legitimate, Abram replied calmly. Purchased from Ezekiel Wilson 3 years ago, properly filed and recorded. We have documentation saying Wilson sold to Blackwater first, Whitmore countered, producing papers from a leather case. Your deed is invalid. Abram examined the documents, immediately noticing discrepancies that Hope had warned him about. These papers are dated after Wilson sold to me, despite claiming to predate my purchase. The witness signatures are from men who weren't even in the territory when this was supposedly signed. Sheriff Miller frowned, taking the papers to examine them himself. Furthermore, Abram continued, presenting the documents Hope had prepared, I've filed a formal complaint alleging fraudulent practices by Blackwater Mining Company, including forging backdated deeds and bribing officials. Whitmore's face darkened. These are serious and unfounded accusations, Mr. Fletcher. They're well-founded enough that Judge Harmon will want to review them personally when he returns next week, Abram replied steadily. "Sheriff, I insist that no action be taken regarding my property until the judge has reviewed all documents." Miller looked relieved to have a legitimate reason to delay. "That seems reasonable. Mr. Whitmore, Blackwater will have its chance to present evidence, but we'll wait for the judge." Whitmore wasn't pleased. "This delay is unnecessary. We have clear rights to this land." "And I have clear documentation challenging those rights," Abram responded. "Unless you plan to take my land by force, in which case Sheriff Miller would be witness to the crime, we'll settle this legally." The confrontation ended in a tense stalemate. Whitmore and his men left with threats of further legal action while Sheriff Miller lingered behind. "Fletcher, you're playing with fire," he warned. "Blackwater has powerful connections all the way to the territorial capital." "And I have the truth and legitimate ownership," Abram replied. "Will you stand for what's right, Sheriff, or what's easy?" Miller adjusted his hat uncomfortably. "I enforce the law as written. If your paperwork is legitimate, I'll support it, but be careful." Not all of Blackwater's methods involve paperwork. The warning wasn't lost on Abram. After Miller departed, he spent the afternoon securing the cabin and property, checking his weapons, and preparing for a possible night visit from less official representatives of Blackwater's interests. As dusk fell, Abram's thoughts turned to his children and, surprisingly often, to Hope Taylor. Her intelligence, courage, and kindness had impressed him deeply. He wondered about her life before Willow Creek, about her marriage to the lawyer who had fought Blackwater, about her dreams before being widowed so young. Night brought no visitors, but Abram slept lightly, waking at every sound. By morning, he decided he needed to return to town to check on his children, consult further with Hope, and possibly gather allies among other homesteaders who might be facing similar threats from Blackwater. Back in Willow Creek, he found his children settled comfortably in Hope's home. Sarah was helping prepare lunch, while Matthew was absorbed in examining a collection of seashells Hope had brought from her childhood on the East Coast. "Papa," they cried in unison when he entered, rushing to embrace him. "Were the bad men there?" Matthew asked anxiously. "They came, but I showed them our papers, and the sheriff made them leave," Abram explained simply. "Mrs. Taylor's help was very important." Sarah looked at Hope with new appreciation. "She showed us how to make paper birds and told us stories about the ocean." Hope smiled. "They've been wonderful company. Sarah has quite a talent for cooking." Over lunch, Abram recounted his confrontation with Whitmore and Sheriff Miller. Hope listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Whitmore is Blackwater's legal representative, but he's also known to employ more direct methods when legal avenues fail," she explained after the children had gone to play in the garden. "My husband documented several instances of intimidation and property destruction that couldn't be directly linked to Blackwater but followed the same pattern. The sheriff warned me to be careful," Abram admitted. "I'm concerned about returning to the homestead with the children." Hope considered this. "Judge Harmon returns in 5 days. Until then, perhaps the children should remain here in town, where there are witnesses and law enforcement." "I can't impose on you like that. It's no imposition," she insisted. "They're delightful children, and honestly, the house has been too quiet since Edward died." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared burdens and perhaps something more. Abram found himself noticing the graceful way she moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength beneath her refined exterior. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." "Defeat Blackwater's claim," she replied. "That would be repayment enough." The following days established a routine. Abram would ride out to the homestead each morning to maintain his presence there, returning to town by evening to spend time with his children and consult with Hope on legal strategies. Each day, the connection between them deepened. On the third day, as they sat on Hope's porch after the children were asleep, Abram asked the question that had been on his mind. "Why did you and your husband come to Wyoming territory? You're clearly educated, cultured. This must have been quite an adjustment." Hope gazed at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Edward had a promising career in Boston, but he believed the frontier needed honest lawyers more than the city did. He wanted to help people build new lives on solid legal foundations. She paused. I was reluctant at first, but came to love the openness, the sense of possibility here. And after he died, you could have returned east. I considered it, she admitted. My parents wrote frequently urging me to come home, but this had become home, and Edward's work seemed unfinished. Abram nodded, understanding the sense of purpose that could anchor a person to a place. My Emily always dreamed of having our own land. When she died, I considered selling and moving on, but it felt like abandoning her dream. We carry them with us in the choices we make, Hope said softly. Their hands rested on the porch railing, inches apart. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Abram moved his hand until his fingers brushed hers. Hope didn't pull away. They sat in companionable silence as night fell completely over Willow Creek. The fourth day brought trouble. Abram arrived at his homestead to find his barn door broken open and his few livestock, 2 milk cows and a pig, missing. Inside the cabin, furniture had been overturned, and ominously, a note had been pinned to the table with a hunting knife. Next time, it won't be just animals. Rage and fear battled within him as he rode hard back to town. Sheriff Miller recorded the vandalism but expressed doubt about being able to prove Blackwater's involvement. This is how they operate, Hope said when Abram told her, escalating intimidation. Edward documented dozens of similar cases. I won't be scared off my land, Abram declared, but I'm worried about the children. Hope placed a hand on his arm. They're safe here, and tomorrow Judge Harmon returns. We'll present our case immediately. That evening, as the children slept, Hope shared Edward's files on Blackwater's activities throughout the territory. He was building a case against them, documenting a pattern of fraudulent land acquisition and intimidation. Is that why you believe his death wasn't an accident? Abram asked gently. Hope's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the papers. A week before he died, he received a warning to drop his investigations. 3 days before, our home was broken into and his files ransacked. And the day before, he told me he'd found evidence linking Blackwater to territorial officials. She looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. Edward was an excellent rider. The idea that he simply fell and broke his neck while riding on a trail he knew well. Abram covered her hand with his. I believe you. Their eyes met, and for a moment it seemed they might move closer, but Hope stood abruptly, composing herself. We should prepare for tomorrow. Judge Harmon will want clear, concise evidence. The next morning brought news that Judge Harmon had indeed returned to Willow Creek. Abram and Hope prepared to present their case, organizing documents and rehearsing arguments. The children sensed the importance of the day and were on their best behavior. As they were about to leave for the judge's office, a knock came at Hope's door. Sheriff Miller stood there, his expression grave. Mrs. Taylor, Mr. Fletcher, there's been a development. Judge Harmon wants to see you both immediately. They followed Miller to the small courthouse, where they found Judge Harmon, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness, looking troubled. Beside him stood Whitmore and 2 other men in expensive suits. Mr. Fletcher, the judge began without preamble, serious allegations have been made regarding your land claim. Mr. Whitmore has presented documentation suggesting your deed was fraudulently obtained. Before Abram could respond, Hope stepped forward. Your Honor, we have evidence that Blackwater Mining Company has engaged in a pattern of fraudulent activities throughout the territory, including forging backdated deeds like the one they're presenting against Mr. Fletcher. For the next hour, the court became a battleground of legal arguments and counter-arguments. Hope presented Edward's meticulously gathered evidence of Blackwater's questionable practices, while Abram testified about the suspicious timing of threats and vandalism coinciding with their legal challenge. Whitmore and his associates responded with their own legal arguments, presenting additional documents and questioning Hope's qualifications to interpret legal matters. Mrs. Taylor is a widow, not a lawyer, Whitmore argued dismissively. Her understanding of complex land law is naturally limited. Hope's eyes flashed. I assisted my husband with his practice for 5 years, Your Honor. Furthermore, fraud doesn't require legal expertise to recognize, only attention to detail and honesty. The judge called for a recess to review all submitted documents. As they waited outside the courthouse, Abram paced nervously while Hope sat with the children, who had been brought by Mrs. Jenkins to await the outcome. "What if we lose?" Abram murmured. "Then we appeal," Hope replied firmly. "This isn't just about your land anymore. It's about stopping Blackwater's predatory practices across the territory." When they were called back into the courtroom, Judge Harmon's expression gave nothing away. "This is a troubling case," he began. "The documentation presented by both sides appears, on its surface, to be legally sound. However, upon closer examination of dates, signatures, and contextual evidence, I find Mr. Fletcher's claim to be the legitimate one." Relief flooded through Abram. Hope squeezed his hand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence presented regarding Blackwater Mining Company's questionable acquisition practices warrants a broader investigation. Sheriff Miller, I'm authorizing you to secure all of Blackwater's local records pending a full review." Whitmore's face darkened with anger. "This decision will be appealed, Your Honor. You're welcome to pursue that course, Mr. Whitmore. In the meantime, Mr. Fletcher's property rights are confirmed, and any further intimidation or vandalism will be treated as criminal matters with severe consequences." Outside the courthouse, Abram lifted Matthew high in the air while Sarah danced around them in celebration. Hope watched them, a mixture of joy and wistfulness in her expression. "We couldn't have done this without you," Abram told her, setting Matthew down. "Edward would be pleased," she replied softly. This was the kind of justice he sought. That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner at Hope's house. The children, exhausted by the day's emotions, fell asleep early, leaving Abram and Hope alone in her small sitting room. "You can return to your homestead safely now," Hope said, pouring them each a small glass of sherry. "Yes," Abram agreed, though with less enthusiasm than might be expected. These days in town, despite the stress of the legal battle, had awakened something in him he'd thought died with Emily, a sense of possibility, of future happiness. "The children have grown attached to you," he said carefully. "They'll miss you." Hope met his gaze. "And I'll miss them. Your family has brought life back into this house." "Hope," he began, using her given name for the first time, "I know it's sudden and perhaps inappropriate to speak of, but these past days have meant more to me than just legal assistance." Color rose in her cheeks. "Abram, I'm not asking for anything," he hastened to add. "Only acknowledging what I feel, admiration, respect, and something more that I didn't expect to feel again after Emily." Hope set down her glass. "When Edward died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused on continuing his work on justice. I didn't expect to find myself caring for someone again, especially not so soon." "Is it too soon?" he asked gently. "Perhaps not," she whispered. "These feelings didn't develop over days, Abram. They've been growing since I first saw how much you love your children, how you fought for what was right." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Abram reached for her hand. When she didn't withdraw, he raised it to his lips and placed a gentle kiss on her fingers. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Only for time to know each other better, to see if what we feel might grow into something lasting." Hope smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Time is something I'm willing to give." In the weeks that followed, Abram divided his attention between rebuilding his homestead and courting Hope properly. The vandalism had been extensive, requiring repairs to the barn and cabin. Hope and the children often accompanied him to the homestead, turning work days into family picnics. Sarah and Matthew quickly came to see Hope as a trusted adult in their lives, turning to her with questions and stories as naturally as they did to their father. 1 month after the court ruling, news came that Blackwater's regional manager and several officials had been arrested following Judge Harmon's investigation. The company's influence in the territory was crumbling as more homesteaders came forward with similar stories of intimidation and fraud. By the first snowfall, Abram had repaired the damage to his property and even expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom. The gold deposits that had motivated Blackwater's interest in his land proved minimal enough for a modest supplement to his farming income, but not the bonanza the mining company had anticipated. On a crisp December evening, with snow falling gently outside, Abram and Hope sat before the fireplace in his cabin. The children were asleep in their room, exhausted from a day of playing in the first significant snowfall of the season. "I have something to ask you," Abram said, taking her hand. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band. "It's not fancy like what you might have had back east, it's perfect," Hope interrupted, eyes shining. "I love you, Hope Taylor. Will you marry me, become a mother to Sarah and Matthew, and build a life here with us?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I love you, and I already love the children as my own." They were married on New Year's Day 1877, with Judge Harmon performing the ceremony in the Willow Creek Church. Sarah served as maid of honor, proudly holding Hope's small bouquet of winter greenery, while Matthew solemnly carried the rings on a small pillow. Spring brought new beginnings. Hope planted an expanded garden, introducing varieties of vegetables from seeds her parents sent from Boston. Abram added a small law office to the side of their home, where Hope could continue providing legal assistance to neighbors facing challenges similar to their own. By summer, news spread throughout the territory of a lawyer's widow and a determined homesteader who had successfully challenged a powerful mining company. Other homesteaders sought their help, and Hope found herself practicing law in all but name, with Abram as her steadfast partner. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Sarah and Matthew play in the yard that now included a swing hanging from the sturdy oak tree. Sometimes Abram would catch Hope watching the children with a particular expression, one hand resting unconsciously on her abdomen. "Are you happy here?" he asked one such evening. "It's so different from your life in Boston." Hope leaned against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible after Edward died. This is where I belong with you and the children." "And the one to come?" he asked gently, covering her hand on her stomach, her eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know? I was waiting to be certain before telling you." "I know your face," he said simply, "better than I know my own." She smiled, remembering the promise she had made to his frightened children that first night. "You'll know my face by morning." "And I do," he whispered, kissing her tenderly as the sunset painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and promise. The baby, a girl they named Emily Hope Fletcher, was born the following winter, completing their family and healing old wounds. As the years passed, their home became known as a place of justice and refuge for those in need. The children grew strong and true, carrying forward the legacy of both their mothers and the father who had fought to give them a home. And on quiet nights when the children were asleep and the house was still, Abram and Hope would sometimes speak of those they had lost, keeping their memories alive even as they built their new life together, a life forged in the crucible of adversity, but flourishing in the sunlight of love found again when neither had been looking for it.